On the behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Annual Policy Initiative Roadmap Process Meeting to discuss the 2022 Draft Final Policy Initiative Roadmap, which was posted on January 12th. My name is Elisandra Casillas, representing the Stakeholder Engagement Group here at the ISO, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. And I'm also joined by Brittany Bean, the lead from Policy Development, along with Greg Cook, Brad Cooper, and John Gooden from Policy. This presentation and other materials related can be found on the initiative webpage. Some housekeeping reminders: this call is being recorded and the video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for information and convenience purposes only. The recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives. Please keep comments professional and respectful. Also, please try and be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said so we can manage time efficiently. Instructions for raising hands: we will pause for questions periodically throughout the meeting. You can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon above the chat window in WebEx, or if you joined via audio only, press #2 on your device. And reminder, please state your name and affiliation first. And if you need any technical assistance during this meeting, please send a chat to the event producer. Please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comment. You may also send your question via chat to all panelists. And from here, I'll go ahead and turn this over to Brittany Bean.
Thank you, Ellie. Next slide, please. First, we'll start with the stakeholder feedback we received from the draft roadmap. Overall, the stakeholder support that we got was, and focus of the comments was supporting the roadmap, and there was, though, concerns about the prioritization and feasibility about the roadmap and annual plan. The more specific concern that we received is that stakeholders were worried that there would not be enough ISO or stakeholder bandwidth to complete other important initiatives that they believe are foundational to our EDAM efforts. Those initiatives that they consider to be important were the Day-ahead Market Enhancements, price formation, resource sufficiency evaluation, and transmission services and market scheduling priorities. The CAISO recognizes these concerns and wants to reiterate that we have developed the roadmap based on these interdependencies among the initiatives, and we appreciate the challenge in achieving the regional day-ahead market by 2024. Next slide, please. The other feedback we received from a number of stakeholders was advocation of us beginning a resource efficiency evaluation phase 1B immediately after the resource efficiency evaluation phase 1 concluded. This was so they could address load conformance adjustment. The ISO understands this issue and plans to conduct further analysis and workshops prior to starting our planned phase 2 of the resource efficiency evaluation, which is set to begin later in 2022. In the meantime, though, we believe it's more appropriate to focus the stakeholder and CAISO resources on the resource sufficiency evaluation changes that are needed for the EDAM effort. The other big stakeholder feedback we received was, while the ISO seems to have a lot on their plate, they still would like for the CAISO to consider devoting a bandwidth to what they deemed less significant issues that are found in our catalog that are important but seem to never be able to make it to the roadmap. Want to reiterate that we consider these all of the initiatives that are in the catalog when developing our roadmap, and those are considered as we go through the prioritization process. With that, I will pause for questions on the stakeholder feedback we received and our responses to those. Ellie, is there anybody that has raised their hand?
Yes, we only have one individual.
Please go
Hi,
ahead.
hi, Dan Williams from Customized Energy Solutions. So kind of within that resource sufficiency evaluation discussion, there was something that came up in one of the recent meetings around the interplay between the EIM transfers and the scheduling of hourly block exports. And I'm just curious if the CAISO has kind of identified a home for looking into that aspect further.
Yeah, hey Dan, this is Greg Cook. I'll answer that. I think, our current thought is that would be an issue we would take up in phase two. And, we're still, and I do want to caveat this a little bit, we're still, considering a potential phase 1B that we would start, earlier than the phase two that would particularly look at issues related to the appropriateness of including a part of the load conformance in the resource sufficiency evaluation. But, a lot of that is going to be based on analysis. And then, the issue you just raised, I think, could also be included in that. And so we're still, contemplating that as, a potential modification to this. And we'll have that decision, prior to us taking the resource sufficiency evaluation phase one to the board coming up in early February. So we're still evaluating that, but again, we're trying to evaluate the resources we have and our ability to accommodate that, because we do realize there were a lot of requests for us to start some of these issues sooner rather than later, and then really hold off to phase two issues like the reevaluating of the consequences for failure, those types of things.
Great, thanks, Greg. I'll look forward to that discussion at the that joint session board meeting coming up. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good morning,
Looks like
Brittany.
we have Rayan.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. This is Rayanne Quadro with Gridwell Consulting. I apologize if this is, forecasting one of your future slides, but could you summarize the changes in the final plan as opposed to the draft plan?
Yes, that we are actually going to get to that slide. So if you can hold off if the question in just 1 second.
I certainly can. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rayanne. If there's no other questions, Ellie, let's move and get those summary of changes going.
No further questions.
Perfect. Next slide, please. So as Rayanne so wonderfully helped me get to the next slide, the changes from our draft plans to what we are presenting now. We changed a few items in how they were described in the draft plan. The first being recognizing that system level market power mitigation is related to our price formation initiative, but that topic is going to be discussed in our EDAM initiative. The second item that was changed is the scope in reference to the resource sufficiency evaluation phase 2. We added 2 items, as you see here. The first is the inclusion of the upward operator adjustments, also known as load conformance. And the second is accounting for exports supported by EIM transfers for speculative exports. There are a few other visual changes you'll see as Brad here in a moment will go through the first part of our roadmap as it relates to the market design and regional market sectors. And from there, those are the only changes that we've made from the draft to final. With that, I'll pause. And if Rayanne has any questions further with that, let's open up her line, please.
There are no questions in the queue.
Okay. From here, I will turn it over to Brad Cooper. Thank you.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I won't go over this whole thing. We've already gone over this in previous meetings. I'll just highlight a couple changes. You know, based on stakeholder suggestions, we've updated to this to note that DAME or in the upper left-hand corner or day-ahead market enhancements that also relates to regional markets as it's the excuse me. Sorry, something in my throat. As it's an important precursor for extended day-ahead market. You know, in DAME, we're adding the imbalance reserve product, which is which is most likely an important component of the extended day-ahead market to be able to diversify and gain efficiencies through incorporating imbalance reserves into the integrated forward market and then procuring them across a wider footprint. DAME is also somewhat modifying residual unit commitment or RUC process by adding downward capacity. And then it's also looking at whether RA resources would bid on zero into the residual unit commitment process, which is all related to the interactions in the extended day-ahead market. So we've noted that it's also a regional markets initiative, and we've added that vertical blue line showing how the results of DAME are going to feed into extended day-ahead market. You know, as people know, DAME is ongoing, and we're finalizing the design. We're having a workshop next week going over some analysis we've done and talking more about the benefits and the interactions with EDAM. But in any case, what this is trying to show is that those results then will feed into the extended day-ahead market initiative, and then DAME will continue somewhat in parallel to, you know, refine the interactions. Looking to the right, the price formation enhancements, we've also noted that that's a regional markets initiative because of the interaction for some requests to examine enhancements by potential EDAM participants. That was suggested by stakeholders, and so we've added that. As we talked about a little earlier, down in the regional markets, the RSE or Resource Sufficiency Evaluation Phase 1 initiative, that's going to our board next month to implement some of the changes by this summer that, you know, people have suggested that the second phase continue immediately rather than starting later, as we've shown here. We're considering that request. You know, we're planning to continue immediately additional analyses and plan some workshops to go over those analyses. And I think a fairly likely modification to this schedule will be acknowledging that as we have these discussions about the analyses, there could be some changes that we could start working on sooner than showing on here. And so it seems like we may well commit to that. I would also note, though, that resource sufficiency evaluation discussions are going on in the extended day-ahead market, and you know we show this interaction with the arrow they're coming down from the extended day-ahead market, feeding into resource sufficiency evaluation phase 2. So, to the extent we're talking about things, for example, ramifications for failing the RSE in the extended day-ahead market, it probably makes sense to defer those discussions or not talk about the discussions separately in phase 2, since it seems like we would come to the conclusion that the approaches should be similar between the day-ahead market and the real-time market to failing the resource sufficiency evaluation. But the extended day-ahead market discussions are ongoing, and so we'll see how that pans out. In any case, our message is we are considering changes to this schedule for the RSC, and I think that covers it for changes to this slide. So I'll turn it over to John. Go to this next roadmap slide.
Okay. Thanks, Brad. And can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Brad. All right, well, good morning, everybody. We're going to talk about the really largely unchanged schedule for these 4 sectors: are resource adequacy, transmission, all things DER and DER, and storage. And so we have initiatives ongoing and upcoming in these 4 sectors. Again, starting with resource adequacy, that sector, I'll touch on some of the high points. We're looking at continuing our RA Enhancements Phase 2 initiative, which has been ongoing. And as folks that have been tracking this, it's largely aligning RA enhancements with our day-ahead market enhancements. And that includes things like, what do we do about flexible RA capacity in light of imbalance reserves, must-offer obligations, how do we adjust, if at all, our must-offer obligations and bid insertion rules. So those are largely what's encapsulated in that enhancement. The next biggie is the central procurement entity. Again, that's been a more expedited initiative, trying to align our tariff and processes with the PUC's formation of a central procurement entity, and our goal is to really create a generic space, if you will, in our tariff for such an entity to exist, be it to the PUC or other LRA. So that's getting close to wrapping up. And then third and finally are some capacity procurement mechanism enhancements to, again, align with some of the changes going on at the PUC with slice a day and considering energy sufficiency as well as capacity. And there's other cleanup items that will go into this initiative that will launch here soon. I suspect that what you'll see here on this slide, that initiative will probably grow and extend beyond what we have here on this slide, given that we are starting to get sort of the wish list of CPM items. So just a little heads up on that. Shifting gears to the transmission sector, really we're focused on our interconnection process enhancements, both sort of the short-term and longer-term enhancements. Shorter term being, how do we manage cluster 14 and the overwhelming load of new resources there and clear that queue and manage that process. And then, changes to GetApp that were identified back in the 2018 process, enhancements there. So that's largely where our immediate focus is going to be in the transmission sector. And then on the DR and DER, we've been making enhancements positioning certain enhancements in RDRR. Again, for those that have been following that just as a heads up is likely to split into 2 tracks, where we continue with the draft final proposal to align the bid cap aligned with FERC Order 831 and how we deal with RDR bids when the cap moves to 2,000. That's moving along nicely, probably going to that April board. But then there's going to be a second track. We'll spend a little more time on addressing the discrete size issue of RDRRs, currently at 50 megawatts, the possibility of moving that up, and some of our operation of RDRR. So that's will be in that initiative as well. And then finally, just want to touch on our storage sector. You'll see there that there's parts of storage that need to be addressed in the price formation enhancements that Brad touched on. So again, that's a carryover where we'll touch on some storage issues as well in that initiative. And then the ongoing energy storage enhancements, that's underway now. And again, for folks that are tracking that, looking at a new storage model based on state of charge, certain reliability enhancements about how you must bid if you're providing AS, and holding state of charge and how that compensation works under exceptional dispatches, and then some co-located resource enhancements dealing with investment tax credits. So that's all encapsulated in that energy storage enhancements initiative. So just wanted to touch on some of the hot items that are moving forward here in these four sectors. But with that, I'll just open it up to any questions on this slide.
As a reminder, for questions, you can raise your hand by selecting the hand icon above the chat window in WebEx, or if you've joined via audio only, press pound key on your device. And please remember to state your name and affiliation first. There are currently no questions.
Okay, thanks. Turn it back over to, I think, Brittany has it.
Actually, Mr. Cook.
All right, we go to the next slide, and I'll take us through the draft annual plan for this coming year. So we've got essentially a baker's dozen of initiatives on the plan. So it's a very, we're planning a very busy policy development schedule for this year. And a lot of it's, you can see this as focused on, our regional initiatives. And, we'll start from the top and work my way down, but, extending the day-ahead market to EIM entities, our EDAM initiative we're putting a lot of focus and resources on that this year. We've colored that a little darker green to try and notify that. It's almost like several initiatives wrapped into one. And then a lot of the additional initiatives we have on our plan for this year are actually somewhat foundational to EDAM as well. Working our way down, we have the resource sufficiency evaluation enhancements. So phase one is just wrapping up. Again, we're taking that to the board here in February. You do see that gap between the finalization of phase one before we start phase two. That was designed so that we could take advantage of a lot of the discussions that were occurring as part of the EDAM process. But, we have received a lot of stakeholder feedback that they would like to see us get started earlier on some of the issues that are being pushed into phase two. So we will be looking at, potentially, slotting in a phase 1B in that open time slot, as I talked about earlier. Then we have the day-ahead market enhancements that Brad was talking about, again, somewhat foundational to EDAM. We're hoping to have that design done sometime mid-year. And again, that's important because we're planning on, implementing both the extended day-ahead market as well as day-ahead market enhancements at the same time in the fall of 2023. So, having that policy of the day-ahead market enhancements completed as early as possible will help us from an implementation standpoint, as well as it will also help inform the ultimate EDAM design going forward. And then we've got the transmission services and market scheduling priorities phase one. That's actually going to the board tomorrow. So that'll be extending the interim approach. And we're currently have underway the more comprehensive longer term initiative to where we're looking at setting up a transmission reservation process as part of the phase two longer term initiative. And again, we would hope to have that, in place prior to the summer of 2024. Then we'll be starting later this year the price formation enhancements. We have the energy storage enhancements that's been ongoing last year. It's going on into this year. We expect to conclude that this year. And then the RA enhancements phase 2, which, these are somewhat limited changes where we're, primarily focused on changes to the RA rules that are needed in order to align with some of the changes in the day-ahead market enhancements. And then some of the more minor initiatives that we're working on are the DRR bidding enhancements that John talked about. We're having to make some tariff changes to align our RA rules with the establishment of the CPUC's central procurement entity. And also, and then we'll be starting our CPM enhancements initiative here shortly. And then finally, we have the 2 initiatives on the interconnection process enhancements in the short term and the longer term that we'll be taking on this year as well. So with that, I'll stop to see if there's any final questions before I hand it back to Brittany to wrap it up.
It looks like we have Dan Williams in the queue.
Hey, Greg. Dan from CES again. Not really on the annual plan here, but just curious, as we head into summer 2022, can you kind of remind us of the cadence of kind of the summer readiness type meetings? I know there's not an official summer readiness track this year, but when does the summer assessment and some of those other activities fall on the map here?
Yeah, so those are, activities that are outside of the policy development. And so I don't have a lot of details on that as of yet, but, I would anticipate we would be having, much more information coming out on that, relatively shortly as to what our, our plans are again for summer readiness for this summer. From a policy standpoint, we're not really planning any market design changes from where we were last summer. We did the summer 2021 enhancements that, continue to be in place, and, we're hopeful those will continue to provide, benefits as we go into this summer as well. But yeah, I guess my answer is that I have to stay tuned for that. We don't have all the details on that as of yet.
Okay, thanks.
You bet. All right, not seeing any more questions. I'll throw it back to you, Brittany.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Now we will talk about the process schedule from what happens after this call. Comments are due January 26th. After we receive those comments, we will be briefing the EIM governing body and CAISO board on February 9th. After that briefing, we will post a final roadmap and sometime in February. And that is the process for this year's 2022 Policy Initiatives Roadmap. Pause here for any last questions before we conclude our call. Looks like we have one in the queue. Operator, will you please open their line?
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Arash Avotzian with EDF Renewables. Could you please go back to the previous slide? Thank you. So just looking at this chart, kind of differentiating between major initiatives and initiatives, the interconnection process enhancements, or I'll just call it queue process improvements. Could you maybe elaborate as to why that is not being considered as a major initiative?
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up. As I was going through this, I think, with what we're contemplating for the scope of particularly phase 2, I think we could categorize that as a major initiative. I think, phase 1 is those smaller changes that we can put in place relatively quickly, but we are looking at, some comprehensive changes to the process for phase 2. So Yeah, I think, we should probably, be more accurate to characterize that as a major initiative, and we'll make sure that's done for the final plan that we put out.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Again, sorry, this is Arash Wotzian with EDF Renewables. Just looking at, obviously, based on recent technical conference on the ANOPR and activities on backlog initiatives that are happening across the country. I'm not sure if CAISO has been following the recent approval of SPP's backlog initiative and PJM kind of following to the same footsteps. It just seems like there's a lot of focus on queue reforms, and given the fact that over the last number of years, it's no secret we've seen backlog across the country in various queue reforms, and that's why it just stands out to me that given the discussions that we've been having last year, kind of into this year, this item needs immediate attention too. So I'd just like to point that out, but I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for the comment. And I think we're definitely in agreement with you. This is, again, these are our high priority initiatives for the year. We definitely think, the queue issues are a big issue that we need to address. We're trying to, meet the objectives of making sure we have, truly viable projects in the, best locations, and, that, there's clearly a lot of enhancements that we need to look at through our queuing process to try and achieve that. And so, yeah, we will be putting, significant resources towards that this year moving forward.
Thank you.
I appreciate your comments.
Yep.
If there are any other comments, please raise your hand. Seeing none. With that, I think we will conclude our call. Ellie, do you have anything to say before we sign off?
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting is recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted on the initiative webpage for a limited time after this meeting. Have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to receiving your comments.